Alrighty, so this is going to be we've got our cheat sheet over there, replacing bearings and maintenance of bearings video. We're going to keep it as informative as we can and just talk it through because there's a lot to understand here if you want to do it properly and also avoid having issues again. So bear with us, it's a long form video, but again, we're just trying to give everyone as much information as we can so that they can fix simple things like this that can prevent you from enjoying your toy.
Yeah.
I mean, the first and most obvious one is if the bearings are physically loose.
Yeah.
So,
Like that.
this is an extreme case. Normally you can't just tip them upside down and the bearing flop out.
No.
The main one, more realistic one, is if you pull the rotor off the motor and the bearings stay on the shaft.
Yeah.
So, quick recap. The reason some bearings are coming out is there's been a tolerance issue on some motors because we get these made in batches of 500 to 1,000. They're machining a hole for the bearings to get pushed into, and there's been some, it's impossible to know which one it is because they're all black,
Yeah.
that was 0.1 of a millimetre slightly too big, like the thickness of a piece of paper. Not even that. So some bearings are not quite as snug as others. So some bearings will be loose, some bearings won't, and that's the issue. So I think we've established why you would want to replace your bearings. I think the only other thing would be is if somehow a bearing was physically broken, like the balls have come out or it's been chipped or it's physically fallen apart, which is pretty rare. Some people have broken bearings by putting their rotor on only just and then letting the rotor go every time, and the magnetic pulling force between these two goes bang every time.
Smacks out the
I will do
front
it for the sake of the video, but this is not how you want to do it. So you just get it lined up and then it goes like that. There's such an aggressive impact of steel onto ceramic. Ceramic is an incredibly hard material. It's 3 times harder than steel, but it is brittle. So when you go to put your stators and your rotors together, really try and hold the rotor and just let it slowly come on like that. You don't want to pinch your fingers, obviously, but it's not that hard. It's just if you're doing it too delicately or you're not even thinking about it, you're just letting it go straight on. That does the bearings no good.
Yeah, it definitely can shatter the the front one. And sometimes because the puck's still on there, you don't even know it's broken. And then it just starts wobbling around by itself and you might not notice and cause some damage as well.
So Jamie's referring to the front bearing in the front of the motor behind the puck. You can't visually see it unless you take it apart. That can get an impact. So you would just pull it off, and this is double wall glue heat shrink. It's quite a tough heat shrink. You just keep working that until you can pull the whole thing out, and then that allows you to get to the front bearing. If you've used this in the water a bunch of times, it'll be slightly easier to get off. This is a brand new motor, so it doesn't want to come off. But you just keep working it, and eventually this spigot here will just go clunk, comes out. Don't cut the heat shrink. You don't need to do that. You just work it off. The glue eventually comes off and it comes out. To put it back in, you literally just put it back in,
Show 'em. I'm trying.
put it back on, and you're good to go. So that's how you would access the front bearing if you've never accessed it before, is you just take the motor puck off. As I said, don't cut your heat shrink off, don't need to.
Yeah,
you want to keep
last resort, if it's really sticky, you just spray a bit of WD-40 or Inox in it and it'll like just give up. And then when you put it back in, you just clean it out with some isopropyl, slide it back in, you're good to go.
Jamie's referring to if you sprayed some WD-40 or Inox in there, it instantly destroys the glue bond.
Yeah.
Comes out.
Straight out.
But you can always put it back in, put it back down, do the bolts up, and it'll work just the same way.
All that is there just to keep sort of a general shape.
Yeah, it's just to try and keep the cable
Straight, yeah.
Super important, do not run the motor if you do not have 2 bearings in the back of the stator.
Yeah.
You need, Jamie can pull them out.
Yeah, I can pull one out. So you have this side, which I just tried pushing that one back in. So we have 2 bearings in this side. 2 just came out there. And then just the one singular one
In the front.
at the front. Now yours likely won't be very easy to remove, but as Paul said, in the rare instances that it is, sometimes they'll fall out and there'll just be one in here. And then when that happens, this sits too far in and it starts grinding on the back and starts causing damage to the motor.
Yeah.
So we really need to remember that there's 2 in the back, 1 in the front.
And you can visually see, Trav will do his best to, when there's 2 bearings, you can see there is like a black circle, which in between both bearings, you can see that there's a slight colour change there.
Yeah.
Obviously they're both white, but it is quite easy to see at a glance if there's 2 bearings in there. 1 is not enough, has to be 2. All right. These are the original rotors, and this is a slightly newer generation. They perform exactly the same, except the newer one has a 45-degree bevel machined into the rotor shaft, and the original ones have the old circlip that used to be there. These obviously self-align a lot better because as they slide in, that radius helps align it, and these are a far blunter surface. So these are easier and they're just easier. These still work, you just got to factor in not letting them go and having this flat surface punch into the back of the bearing.
Yeah, the chamfer should reduce the risk of breaking that front bearing.
Quite a lot.
Quite a lot, yeah.
If you've got one of the older shafts, something that can just help with getting motors in and out is just get a bit of, this is 1200 grit or 600 grit sandpaper, and just grab the tip of the shaft with your thumb and your index finger and just do this a few times. Fresh bit of sandpaper, do it again. And I don't know if it comes up in camera, but it almost polishes the surface. If you just keep doing that for 4 or 5 minutes, you'll actually put the slightest bevel on the tip of the shaft, which actually, it's amazing how much difference it can make. If some motors are a little bit grabby, it helps it go in and out. But the other best thing you can do is just a bit of grease. Smear it on the shaft, spray your motor with your WD-40, inox, lanolin, whatever it is you have, and then the motor shaft will go in and out really smooth.
If it's at all tight or hard to get on and off, just grease the motor shaft.
Grease it and lube it. Easy. It's a thing you should do after every session just by default because it'll just make life easier. Remember, it is salt water typically. This is a metal and they need lubrication. So put it on gently. I'll just do this one more time. Sometimes you can put a little rag there if you're a bit worried about it. And the rag sort of, whoop, I was grabbing the wrong thing. You wrap the rag around it. If you're having trouble holding on to it, because it is quite an abrupt sort of pulling action, line it up. Boom, and it hits the rag. Then I can just pull the rag off. Ta-da.
It's a nice gentle way of doing it.
And then there's no sudden bang. All right, moving on. Removing the bearings. So how to remove all 3 bearings from the stator. So the caveat to this video is we are making the video on the assumption that it is relatively straightforward to get the bearings out, and all the bearings have already started to come out. We will do a second, what we're calling second stage video, which is where we have to go to other levels of persuasion to get the bearings out, which is meaning it's being difficult and not wanting to come out, so we have to force them to come out. We're not doing that in this video because most people won't have to go through that. There'll be a separate video for people that need a little bit of extra help. So Jamie kind of simulated it before,
Yeah.
but for completion,
I
let's
can
just do
chuck
it
it
again.
back in and
So we're going to pretend that the bearings, in this case, are still in the motor, but might be loose, or when you take your rotor off, when the rotor comes off, they kind of half pull out.
yeah.
You just want to get the bearings out so that we can clean and prep for regluing.
Yeah, so we've taken everything off and we'll show you how to take your puck off without having to tear or destroy the heat shrink a bit later. But, so you have two bearings in here, flip it over. If it doesn't fall out like that one did, you can get something called a drift with the square edges and put it in. And likely you'll need to hit it with a hammer quite hard, but this is, oh yeah. Just until, I think I already got it. Just until it moves
And then it comes out.
comes out.
You don't need to belt it. When you're trying to tap it out, this incredibly tough ceramic circle is stuffed inside a machined metal tube.
Yeah.
There's not much room for twisting to happen. So when you're trying to, let me draw it that way. When you're trying to tap the bearing out, what you're really wanting to do is go tap, 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 little tiny taps,
Yeah.
and keep swapping sides so that the bearing, I'm going to accentuate what we're doing here, the bearing can sort of like walk its way out, but I'm talking fractions of a millimetre at a time. One thing you do not want to do is just put it on one side and go bang, and absolutely belt the crap out of it, because there's so much torsional load on one side, it can't twist, you'll probably just break the bearing.
Yeah, exactly. You'll bind it up and then it will just shatter.
So, yeah, you just want tap, 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 tap. If you can even be like all four sort of corners
Yeah.
of a circle, which
Yeah,
doesn't exist,
exactly.
but all sort of four positions, and just tap it out. It will come out with just gentle persuasion. And something that can help, which we didn't actually bring for the video, you can spray WD-40 or some sort of lubricant spray
Yes.
inside here and on the outside,
Yeah.
and it will try and filter its way down into the crevices and help free it up.
Yeah.
So,
So it's the same thing. Once you've got
Yeah.
two out, flip it over. One will just need a little tap, but as you said, hammer might be required.
yeah.
Do the other one, and now we've got a stator with nothing in it.
So that's completely clean.
That's no moving parts left. It's
So
nothing.
before we get to replacing, the other what's the word I'm trying to look for?
Other
Instance?
possible, instance.
is if your bearing gets stuck on the shaft of the actual motor. Rare, can happen. So normally a rotor's got a propeller hub on the back. You would want to, with your 2.5mm Allen key, undo these 4 bolts, remove the rotor, and then you would remove the propeller hub off the rotor, and then you're going to end up with a bare metal rotor. The useful thing about this is, in the back of this rotor is 4 bolt holes. And if I flip it around, those 4 bolt holes also allow you to the back side of the bearing. If I was to push this device through, I can actually, if it's a smaller diameter than this, you can poke it in, get the back side of the bearing, tap them off.
Yeah. Same thing, back, forth, either side, small movements, and it should come out.
So if that bearing was really jammed on there, spray some like lubricant in there, WD-40, I think that's a pretty global thing.
Yeah.
Degreaser, sorry, not
Inox.
degreaser, inox,
Yeah.
WD-40, that type of stuff. Spray it in there, get it nice and wet, put the rotor on something, and then get a fine pin and tap, tap, go to the next hole, tap, tap, and you keep working it, and it will come out. As long as you do it evenly and just give it time to do it, that is how you would get a bearing off the shaft.
These drift tools often come as a set as well. So if you're really having trouble with your motor, you can get a set that they come in big ones, small ones.
From a hardware store.
Yeah, you'll be able to find one that'll go through there in the same set as you'll be able to find one to go through the top of the motor. So
And they're cheap. They're not
Yeah.
not very expensive. So
they don't have to be amazing.
I think we've got removing sorted. Again, If you cannot get the bearing off in any of these circumstances, that would be a stage 2 thing, which you're probably going to reach out to support for anyway. And we can send you the link to that and help you through that process.
Yeah.
But I cannot stress this enough. Lubrication, small little taps, lots of them, and work its way out. You will get 95% of all cases.
Yeah.
That will help you get it done.
Another quick little tip, just real quick for the one that gets stuck in here. If it doesn't end up moving whilst going through the front, you can get a larger diameter one and just trying to hit it down whilst hitting both the inside and the outside part of the race, like that. If you do that, it might break whatever's holding it in, and then you'll be able to get the smaller one and do the
Yeah.
back and pull it out, because that can help just release whatever's holding it on.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
So now we're going to go into cleaning and prep.
All right.
I think this is probably the most misunderstood step, and it's really important too. So before we start, adhesives are only as good as the surface they're sticking to.
Yeah.
Cannot stress that. Cannot stress that enough. Get a piece of sticky tape, stick it to a fresh piece of glass window. It's got beautiful adhesion. That same glass window, just wipe your hand over it, or get a 5-year-old with greasy fingers to wipe his hand over the window.
Chip
Put
fingers.
that same piece of sticky tape on it. It just comes off without even trying. So there's a surface, then there's the thing you want to stick to the surface. But if there's something in between that surface and the thing you want to stick, like grease or some sort of material that's not conducive to being stuck, that is the weakest link. So you must clean the surfaces properly if you expect these industrial products, which do the job very well, to work. You have to clean the surface. If you don't do that, you are wasting your time. I think I've made that clear.
I think so.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So first step, clean the surface. Take us through that, Jamie.
All right. So, clean rag. And the first step, if your motor looks something like this, is just get the grease out. So, just a general wipe down to start with.
Clean rag.
Clean rag. And then
I think
that's
let's
pretty...
let's be clear. I don't care what your motor looks like. Let's just assume
Yeah.
it's got grease on it. We clean it to the nth
Yeah, exactly.
degree. So,
And then we use isopropyl alcohol as like a solvent. Basically gets most of the grease and basically any
cleaning
residue
alcohol,
out. Yes, it's
basically.
cleaning, rubbing alcohol, anything like that. Methylated spirits would probably do it.
Yep.
And really, look at that, the motor's pretty clean in our case, but
You can also
you won't
use
notice.
little cotton buds as well.
Yep.
Again, it's just a different device for cleaning. But again, as long as it's clean, don't use an old rag. Even if it looks clean, it's probably got impurities and oils and all that sort of crap on there. So give it the best chance and clean it properly.
I've got squeaky clean now. All right, so the front bearing right now was pretty tight. It was okay.
Yep.
So we'll end up using the 620 for this one.
And this is also a primer. So what this is a product that is designed to spray onto a surface. Give it there for the camera. Spray it onto the surface, and what it does is it preps and etches the surface in preparation for glue. So it's like a super cleaner, if you will. And this will only help the entire process.
Yeah.
You don't have to use it, but again, I think it's just worth doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the primer helps the glue. So let's use the primer for completeness.
All right.
Get your rag so you don't spray it on the table.
Dirty rag. Just really light amount. You don't have to soak it. Okay.
So again, not a huge amount, and then you can use a little cotton bud to that then smears it all over the surface.
Takes all the excess
See
off.
the green stuff, takes the excess off. But that just literally wipes it on there. Cool.
All right, we don't want to make sure it's
Now we need a bearing.
reasonably dry. All right.
Same thing for the bearings.
Yep.
Clean the bearing too, because there's not much point in cleaning everything else and then not cleaning the surface of the bearing. It might have stains on it if you're reusing an old one like we're using here. When I say stains, like that smudge mark is literally particles of aluminium stuck in the pores of the ceramic. So you're not going to rub that out. So that's now clean.
Good stuff.
And try not to put your oily fingers on the surface, but the bearing should come with a bearing pushing tool. If you don't have this tool, reach out to support and we can send you the STL file and you can print your own, or we will literally send you one if you don't have it as well.
It is possible to put it in straight without one if you're in a pinch.
Yeah.
You just got to be a bit more careful, basically. That's it.
Right. So Jamie's now just applying the Loctite glue to the outside of the bearing race. You don't need heaps of it on there. You wouldn't go much more than that.
Yeah, that's probably enough.
Because again, the gap it has to fill is tiny, so most of that will squidge off.
Yeah.
And then it's a matter of...
And you mentioned orientation as well. You see I have the bearing balls facing us, and the other side of the bearing looks like this with the little shield, a little thing that holds the bearings in place. I've put this up, so when we tip it over, you have the shield facing us.
And the balls face into the motor,
Yeah.
basically.
It doesn't matter a huge amount if you've stuffed it up. It's not going to make or break the
if
motor.
you glued it in and realised it was the wrong way
Yeah,
around,
that's fine.
don't remove it
No.
just to achieve that.
So I can tip it together, like that, and then push it down. Make sure it's straight. You want to make sure everything's square and lined up. And there'll be some excess. We'll just carefully wipe that up. Try not to put it into the bearing.
Sort of wiping away to the outside.
So like that. There we go.
And for completion, I would put the push back in there and just tap it with the hammer, just
Yep.
slightly.
Okay.
Even though it's not really like 100% necessary, we'll
Making sure it's straight.
We'll just do that anyway.
Yeah. That actually might have seated a little bit more. So
Yeah.
there you go.
Beautiful. Now you would leave that for 24 hours to let it fully set.
Yep.
And that is it for getting a bearing to be re-glued in. So we're going to do the other two. It's a very similar process. And we're going to also demonstrate using a different bearing retaining compound. It does exactly the same thing, it's just this is an even more hardcore version of what we're currently using. Okay, so we're doing the rear bearings, same thing. I want to clean the bearing. That is nice and shiny now. And this is a different product, 660. It's for slightly bigger gaps. Whether you use the green stuff or this stuff, I don't really think there's a huge amount in it, but we're just doing it because sometimes people can find one product and not the next. I cut the nib off this, kept the hole reasonably small. It really just helps me sort of just paint it on in little tiny dabs.
Oh, nice.
That's actually quite artistic,
Quite a bit of
isn't it?
skill there, isn't there? All right, well, look at that.
There we go. Again, I didn't touch the sides with my greasy fingers. So we need to prep the inner race again.
Yep.
With it's like a funny sort of comes out almost like a jet of liquid. This stuff, not a spray. Again, it's not a spray. It's a liquid primer. So I'm just gonna break that. Now that is beautifully primed. That's ready to receive its first bearing. So balls facing in, tip it up, put it flat,
Your little
get the hammer.
tappy tap.
I felt that go down a tiny little bit. So it's definitely worth seating it. And I did a pretty good job with the amount of glue retaining compound that I put in there because it didn't really ooze right up.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show you that there is a gap, a small gap in there. And then for something different, I'll use the green stuff.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Balls facing in. Let's do that. The painting routine. Beautiful. Okay. Marry them up. Put it in. Beautiful.
Nice.
I tend to use the Tipex. So not a Tipex, cotton bud.
Cotton tip,
That's
yeah,
what I'm
whatever.
trying to say.
Something like
To
that.
clean up the glue. I just find it easier than the rag. Okay, got all the excess off. So that is now 2 bearings that are well seated, got a great clean surface, been tapped in properly, and they should not come out. There's no good reason for them to ever come out of our house. So that concludes how you would reseat new bearings. So I'm just trying to look at our little to-do list over here. So cleaning, prep. Yeah, cool. So we've meshed it in there.
Basically.
Well seated. There is a third and final step that you can do, which is something new that we've come up with since we've seen a few bearings come out.
Yeah, yeah.
I think to put it in perspective, we've had 1,000 something motors go out before we've ever saw bearings ever start coming out. So it was a small batch window of some motors had the machining tolerance slightly too big. So there's another product. We're not endorsed by Loctite.
We should be.
We should be. Loctite 480, it's a super glue. So every motor that leaves the factory for the last few weeks, ever since we saw these, it's actually longer than that now, time passes, we've been adding a Loctite 480 as an additional retaining compound just to really make sure these things stay in. So we have the luxury of doing this every day. So we've got the right bottle and a steel needle that's been ground to a very fine point, which allows us to apply it easily. You're not going to have this likely lying around.
No.
So the emphasis here is if you're going to add this extra step and this extra retaining process, just squeeze a bit of the Loctite 480 onto a surface, and then with a paddle pop stick cut to a fine point or a skewer or something like that, you just dig up a tiny little bit. And what you want to do is just paint the glue around the race. Now, I don't know how much you can zoom in there, Trav. Why don't you... Is that coming up okay? Yeah, you might be able to zoom in with the lens, but what I'm actually doing is I'm using the really fine tip of the skewer to apply 480 just to the extreme edge of the bearing, not in the race. We don't want it going in where the balls are. We want the glue to go between the metal and the outer race of the bearing. Now, by putting it on a fine surface like this, a fine tip, the capillary action of a liquid onto two surfaces will pull the glue off the tip and naturally want to wick up the surface of the stator and the bearing. There we go. So I've now applied carefully and accurately a bead of Loctite 480 around the aluminium housing and the race of the bearing. So that's a third retaining compound that we've used as just an extra
Yeah, exactly.
way to keep them in. So once you've done this, it's actually pretty quick. It's not.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. The first time takes time, but if you ever have to do this again in the future, you know, clean your bearing,
Yep.
clean the inner race, get that clean. Both surfaces are clean. Apply your little Loctite, push it in, tap it in, seat the bearing, do the other ones or only one or whatever many needed to be done. Let it dry for a full 24 hours. Please let it dry. Don't just go and jump in the water because you just undo all your hard work.
Exactly. Even now, like you wouldn't want to go put your rotor on and try and
point.
pull it apart because it'll just pull everything apart before it's all
Yeah.
set.
So leave it all apart for 24 hours. Very good point.
Yeah.
And then you should be good to go. So I think if we look at our list over here, we covered off everything. So in summing up, primer, Loctite 7649. You might find in your country there's a slightly different variation, but if you talk to anyone who sells this type of stuff, you're really just asking for a primer to help a bearing retaining compound glue. So we use Loctite 620 retaining compound. Again, it might be slightly different in your country. Once again, if you're referring to trying to do the application of retaining a bearing, it's all pretty similar.
Yeah.
And then the Loctite 480 as a glue. This is particularly good because it's black and you can see where you're applying it. And it's slightly thick, so it sort of makes this little lip seal, if you will, help glue that in. This is just cleaning alcohol, isopropyl. You don't have to specifically use an aerosol cleaning alcohol.
Just acetone, like
Acetone,
bottle of acetone,
methylated spirits, terps,
something like that. Yeah.
that sort of stuff. A cleaning solution is really what you're looking for. I think that's enough from us.
I think that's
I
about
think
it.
we've talked that to completion.
Yeah, again, if you have problems like you've tried hitting the bearings out of the end of the motor or something and they've gotten stuck and then you've hit them a little bit harder and you've smashed them, we'll be doing, most likely if we need to,
With stage 2.
stage 2, bigger problems,
Extra
harder solutions.
Extra persuasion.
Exactly.
Yeah, because there will be those fringe cases where for some reason you just can't get it off or you do damage it in the process.
Exactly.
We'll try and have a different help video for that alone.
Happens to the best of us, even servicing kits,
Yep, that's it.
Gotta fix it.
Thanks for your time. Hopefully you found this informative.
Yeah.
Get out there, have some fun in the water, and see you next time.
Awesome.